My next guest is someone who takes on the deep state every day, every hour of every day, every minute of every hour, much to their chagrin. He is a very courageous individual who has an incredible track record, and he is one of... Every time we bring him on our platform, I am inundated with requests from you, our listeners, to get him back as soon as possible. Alex Newman is a regular contributor to The New American magazine, thenewamerican.com, thenewamerican.com. The print version, as well as the online version, are some of the best things you can put your hands on as far as content. Alex earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Florida, and Alex has been working for The New American magazine as a foreign correspondent and also owns a consulting firm. His frequent topics include economics, education, finance, banking, business, and politics, just to name a few. Alex, interesting with his background as reporting as a foreign correspondent, Alex grew up in Latin America, Europe, and Africa, which has given him a unique insight into world events and into the people of the world. It's my honor to welcome back Alex Newman from thenewamerican.com, thenewamerican.com. Alex, welcome back to Operation Freedom.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Dave. It's great to be with you.
So speaking of Europe, Alex, you recently were in Madrid at some call it a conference, a very important conference. Some would call it a clown show. Educate our listeners on what you were doing in Madrid and what conference you attended and what you experienced.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, Dave. And I think this is such an important story. And, when the establishment media doesn't say a word about something and it's this significant, that something big is going on, that they've got big plans. So what happened was the United Nations, every year they have their climate conference. This was the 25th annual, they call it the Conference of the Parties. So it was the COP25. And you had all kinds of world leaders, all kinds of prominent Americans. John Kerry was there, Al Gore was there, Nancy Pelosi was there, Senator Whitehouse, who wants to lock up people he calls climate deniers, who wanted to use anti-mafia laws, the RICO statutes, to put Americans in jail who disagree with his crazy religion, the man-made global warming hypothesis. And so they all got together, every government on the planet, to basically decide how they are going to rule the world under the guise of saving us from eco-disaster caused by the gas you exhale, carbon dioxide. It was, I think clown show is the perfect term to describe it. And I think that's why the American people don't even realize it happened. Even my very well-informed friends, I told them I'm going to the UN Climate Summit in Madrid. They're like, what? I didn't even know that was going on. It's because the media has been silent as a mouse, because the American people, and even liberals and Democrats, if the American people knew what was going on at this place, knew the kind of rhetoric, the kind of things that were being discussed, it would all be put to an end, because, the American people would have none of it. They would wake up a sleeping giant, and that would be the end of it. So crazy stories, Dave, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about it.
Well, educate us on some of the stories and some of the information, the misinformation that was presented there and then the proposals made. Yeah,
so the big purpose of this year's climate conference, Obama signed the Paris Agreement in 2015. I was at that UN clown show as well, and the media was actually talking about that one because Obama was there, and they tried to make it look moderate. The whole purpose of the COP25 ostensibly was to negotiate the final rules for what they call their global carbon markets. And it's actually a very misleading term. They're not actually talking about a carbon market. They're talking about creating an artificial, quote-unquote, market for emissions of carbon dioxide. Now, to give people some background who aren't very familiar with this whole discussion, there's nothing that a human being can do, and I mean nothing. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't even die without CO2 emissions. Because, we exhale CO2. Everything we do produces CO2 every time you turn on a light switch, right? And so they have convinced governments, NGOs funded by taxpayers, that this is some kind of toxic pollution that's going to kill us all within, I think now they said 8 years, if we don't let the UN tax and regulate it. So under the Paris Agreement, they came up with this global carbon market idea where everybody on the planet is going to start having to pay money to emit CO2, starting with Western countries, America first, of course. They want us to pay the whole bill for this clown show. Then we need climate reparations. That was another big item on the agenda. basically Americans need to pay money to third world kleptocrats because, apparently we polluted the atmosphere with CO2, and therefore we owe them money for bad weather and fires and things like that. So that was the agenda, Dave. And fortunately, we have a president in the White House who has called this hypothesis that this is all based on a hoax, is the word he used, to benefit the communist Chinese. I think it's a perfect description of it. I would even use the term fraud because it's so clearly deliberately calculated to, criminally deceive the American people. But they didn't make almost any progress because of President Trump. And so, I think President Trump deserves a huge round of applause for standing in the way of this. But the danger's not over.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're just kind of setting the stage, right, for when they hope he leaves sooner rather than later.
That's exactly what was happening. And, they recognized America was being demonized like people can't even imagine. I hope people will go to the New American and read some of our stories. I mean, you would have thought America was like Nazi Germany with Mao Zedong and Lenin and Stalin all combined into one, like this horrible, evil place. Because President Trump has stood in the way of this. He said, we're not paying any more money. We're leaving the Paris Agreement. And so they were just furious. I mean, it was nonstop. Even the Americans, every single American who spoke there, and there was many prominent Americans who spoke there, came there to demonize the United States, to demonize our president, to demonize the Republican Party and the American electorate. It was crazy. And, the sense was, a coalition of 12 Democrats actually showed up there, led by Nancy Pelosi, and they said, hey, we're still in, just wait till Trump is gone, everything's going to be back to normal, we're going to get right back in the Paris Agreement, we're going to get right back to sending billions of dollars to you guys, so nobody worry, right? The show can continue, just give us another year, we'll get rid of President Trump, and everything will be back to normal. So that's their strategy right now, Dave. It's just try to wait out Donald Trump and hope that these changes do not last into the future. And, that's where we all come in. So, the American people need to be very active. And I think, again, that's why the media didn't report on any of this, because if the American people knew, that would jeopardize their plans even further.
What was the most shocking proposal you heard there?
Well, one of the things that I focused on while I was there was this incredible zeal to reduce the population of humans on the planet. And in America, they kind of speak about this under their breath. They don't actually go on TV and say there's too many people, we need to reduce the number of people, because they know Americans would recoil in horror. But at this climate clown show, I mean, you couldn't throw a paper ball in any direction without hitting some population control nut. There's actually a very prominent scientist. His name is Dr. Roy Spencer. He's a NASA climatologist, and he calls them the global warming Nazis. And I think it's a good term. And when you're there in the midst of all this, you really understand why it's such a perfect term. They just have this obsession with reducing the number of people on the planet. And, they have some disagreements about how exactly we ought to do it. And, should we target Europeans first, or maybe we need to get Africans first, or, maybe the Asians, we should start there because there's so many Asians. But, they have some disagreements among themselves, but they're all totally united on this idea that there's too many people, we have to reduce the number of people, abortions are good, mandatory contraception, sterilization. We got one guy on camera from a previous UN conference in 2019 literally laughing about, well, we can't kill them all. Twice, he said it. So, that's the mindset. I had one guy, he thought he was the most important guy in the universe. He was the director of the documentary Woodstock. He claimed it was the most viewed documentary of all time, and he was given a very prominent platform. He spoke on all the big UN stages about the need to reduce the number of humans, and he pointed right in my face when I asked him what the solution to this was, and he says, I'm looking at you, white man, no more children. I didn't have the heart to tell him. I got a whole bunch of little children back home in America. But they're just crazy about this idea, Dave, that there's too many people and we have to cut down the numbers.
He pointed right at you.
He did, right in my nose. And we got it all on video, too. So we put that up on our YouTube account. We shared it on Facebook, Twitter. People can see. We actually did a 20-minute interview where I didn't reveal my true opinions. When we got done with the interview, he actually thanked me and said it went really well and I should keep up the good work. The poor guy didn't even realize it. The whole time I was thinking, what in the world? But and he was one of many that we got on camera just telling us we have to reduce the number of people, and I gave him so many opportunities. I asked this guy, the director, his name was Michael Wadley. I said, there's these two guys, Obama's science czar John Holdren and his sidekick Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb guy. They proposed mandatory abortions and forced sterilizations, and that we should add sterilizing agents to the water supply to reduce the population. You don't think that's a little bit too extreme? And I figured, I'm giving this guy an off-ramp. He can say, oh, yeah, that's totally crazy. We would never do that. But he actually said to me, oh, you haven't heard me talk yet, implying that they weren't radical enough. So this is the mindset that I'm talking about, Dave. These people live in an entirely different universe from the average American, from the average Christian. And, normal people would see this and be horrified. But these people, a lot of them don't even realize how disgusting all this sounds.
So what's the best way to combat this? Other than exposure, right? Light of truth on it. That's more people get to realize what these deep state puppets are doing. What else? What else can be done, Alex?
Yeah, I think that is the key right there, Dave. And I think first people need to understand how central this whole global warming hoax is to the broader agenda. Right? They are using the global warming hoax as a pretext to bring in global taxation. We used to joke when I was younger, one day they're going to try to tax the air we breathe. That's literally what they're talking about on a global scale. These monies would be paid directly to the United Nations. They've already set up a green climate slush fund that Obama was shoveling billions of dollars into. Thankfully, President Trump put a stop to all that. But this is central to their agenda for global governance, for a new world order. And so it's imperative that we stop it. And I think the key tools at our disposal, one is just the truth. The truth is just so clear, it's so obvious at this point that their hypothesis is ludicrous. The problem is, with the propaganda machine, the CNN, the mainstream media, of course, they're brainwashing all the children. So I think that's really where we need to focus, is disseminating the truth. Part of that, for adults will be, getting copies of important documents and articles. You can print out our articles from the New American. We love it when people share that stuff. Listen to this broadcast and share it with your friends. Share the link. Get people to listen to the radio programs. So get the truth out. And then secondarily, it was so obvious while we were there, Dave, that the whole central element of their strategy is to brainwash the children. In fact, Al Gore actually stood up on one of the stages. He's like, yeah, I know everybody feels, depressed right now because Trump is calling us a hoax and a cult and all that. But don't worry, all the children in the world are marching for climate justice. It's just a matter of time before we win, right? I mean, this is the kind of mindset that they have. They know they've got the great majority of the children in government schools, and they know that government schools, not just in America, but all over the world, are brainwashing the children to believe in this. Greta Thunberg, I think, is the ultimate example.
Well, that's why they have her as a spokesperson. Yo, kids, you can be like Greta, right?
That's right. And that was the mindset. They had kids running all over this conference, demanding climate justice, demanding climate reparations, demanding population control. And so, that is their strategy. Brainwash the adult population, but they know they're never going to be able to get enough Americans on board with this, adult Americans. So they're going for the kids. So if we want to win this fight over the long... We also interviewed Mark Morano, who's considered climate villain numero uno, right? Nature magazine actually did a study, and they found out that he was the most cited climate... They call them deniers, right? People who deny the reality of this, as the supposed reality of this hypothesis of theirs. And he said, unless we change the narrative... He was actually quoting from Trump's climate advisor, Dr. William Happer, who we've interviewed many times. I've spoken at climate conferences with him. Amazing guy. They all said, we need to change the narrative. Right now the narrative is, well, we shouldn't do these global warming things because they're too expensive. It's not a good policy idea. We need to completely switch that narrative around and say, no, we're not going to do these things because it's all based on a giant hoax. It's a criminal fraud. That's why we're not going to do these things. So I think that's central, Dave. We've got to change the narrative. We've got to get people thinking not in terms of, well, hey, this policy is a little bit too expensive, and thinking in terms of, hey, we're being defrauded here. We are being victimized by a criminal cabal of deep state scam artists who want to extort us and extort our children and take our money and take our liberty for themselves, and we've got to oppose it. And so changing the narrative, protecting our children, and educating our communities is how we're going to stop this thing.
Folks, we're speaking with Alex Newman. I encourage you to go to thenewamerican.com. Alex, many people believe this is just the D's on the side of the aisle that are speaking, and I've made the point that There's one political party in Washington. It's called the Republicrats. They're owned and operated by the same syndicate. And there's really one aisle, and they're all around that aisle. And in fact, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but this whole issue that you're speaking about now started really many decades before, but in particular gained legs in 1992 when George Bush I signed off on Agenda 21, of which all these issues that you're speaking about are related to and have come from, correct?
That's exactly right, David, and not many people know that. So what happened was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev and Al Gore and all these globalists who want global totalitarianism got together as part of what they called the Club of Rome, and they put together a report called the First Global Revolution. And they said, hey, now the Cold War's over. We need an excuse to keep government enormous. We need an excuse to keep taxes so high. We need an excuse to keep taking away people's rights. What's our excuse going to be? Hey, we've got it. Humanity itself is the enemy. It is literally what they wrote in this report. Humanity is the enemy. So they said that, we're going to come up with this idea that humans are polluting the planet and only a global government and global tyranny can save us from this. So that's where they were coming from. And then George Bush really kicked it all off with this Agenda 21 document that kind of set the framework. Then they came up with the Kyoto Protocol. Now we've got Agenda 2030. These all go straight back to this idea that they had that, hey, we will use this manufactured environmental crisis as a pretext to bring in our global system. Because their whole mantra is, hey, this is a global problem, and nations can't solve global problems. Only a global government can solve a problem. So you're absolutely right, Dave. This is both parties have been involved in this. Now they're looking for Republicans to defect over to the global warming alarmism side. They've already found a few. Ironically, they're all funded by big oil, which is, I thought I'd throw that out there. Now they've got a bipartisan climate solutions caucus. I think they've got 3 or maybe even 4 Republican senators now who are on board with, imposing all these climate policies. And in the House, they've got at least 20 Republicans openly on board with this agenda. And there's a whole bunch more that are just waiting for the right time to stab us in the back. Right now they know a lot of them that it would be politically suicidal, but as soon as they think they can get away with it, they will stick that knife right in our back and impose all of these monstrous policies on us, and that's a fact.
Over the past several weeks, if not month and a half, a number of folks have stepped forward and said, well, look at these terrible brush fires in Australia, and they are terrible. This is all an indication, and all because of man-made global warming. Well, Alex, just in the past week, it was announced that nearly 200 people were arrested across Australia for deliberately starting the brush fires.
Yep, and that's a key part of it, Dave. And the other key part of it, the other part that they don't want anybody talking about, is that it was green policies that created the situation where these arsonists could come in and burn down huge parts of Australia. It was the Greens, it was the environmentalists who said, no, we can't have forest roads, we can't have logging companies go in and clear stuff, we can't have ranchers clearing the undergrowth, even on their own land. And we have the same kind of problem in the United States, especially out in the western states where the feds control so much land. This is a recipe for catastrophe. And, if you want to know who to blame for the Australian fires and for some of the environmental problems we're seeing in the United States, it's the environmental movement itself. And then they have the nerve, they have the audacity to try to blame it on man-made global warming. It's so sick, Dave. But you're right. This is a combination of arson and failed green policies. And naturally, they would blame it on global warming. But we need to be crystal clear here that this had nothing to do with alleged man-made global warming and everything to do with criminals and stupid criminal green policies.
And then Glacier National Park in Montana, beautiful place. They had signs up about how all the glaciers in Glacier National Park are going to be gone by 2020. Headline, Glacier National Park to remove all glaciers will be gone by 2020 signs. Glacier National Park is removing signs that state all glaciers will be melted by 2020. Glacier National Park spokeswoman Gina Kurzman explained that since the early 2000s, scientists have reflected and analyzed data stating glaciers would recede by 2020, but that in fact hasn't occurred. Hence, the removal of the signs.
Yeah, and you know, one of the amazing things that we did, Dave, because, you know, I recognize that not everybody's a scientist, not everybody wants to read through, you know, peer-reviewed literature, of which there's plenty debunking the man-made warming hypothesis. So one of the things we did was we went back in time. I did this for the New American twice in investigative pieces, found all the falsifiable predictions these people have made, going back to global cooling in the 1970s and early 80s, followed by, you know, global warming, climate change. And the ones where they said, hey, by this date, this will happen, every single one that we could find was not only proven wrong, in most cases, it was the exact opposite of what actually happened. So, you know, they would say that these areas were going to see people fleeing because of, you know, new floods, and we were going to have climate refugees. What actually happened was the populations of those areas exploded during that time. So, you know, a non-scientist can look at this and say, wow, these guys have been wrong about absolutely everything. And we're expected to believe them now that they know, you know, the temperature of the planet's going to go up 1.5 degrees, you know, at the end of 100 years. Give me a break. It's totally crazy. I was just in Glacier National Park this summer. The glaciers are still there. It's true that there are some glaciers on the planet that are receding slightly. And, you know, one of the interesting things they never tell you about, as the glaciers recede, what they find is forests buried under there, ancient forests that were alive 1,000 years ago. So what we know is the Earth was a lot warmer 1,000 years ago. Where we have glaciers today, there was actually forests 1,000 years ago. This was called the medieval warm period. It's another thing that the climate alarmists never want to talk about. But the science is so crystal clear at this point. The man-made warming hypothesis is not just a hoax, because a hoax implies like kind of something funny or playful. This is a deliberate criminal fraud to deceive and extort the American people and the people of the planet into surrendering their money and surrendering their liberties.
That's what it's all about. It's not a see. That's the frustrating thing, Alex. Right? This is really all about money, power, and control, and it's not about climate or humanity.
Exactly, and that's the key to understanding all this. You know, is that people want to debate the science, and we've done that for 30 years. They're wrong. We're right. You know, man's CO2 emissions are not causing any kind of climate emergency or climate catastrophe. What this is just a pretext to use as an excuse to build up these global governing structures, to impose global taxes, to steal more of our money, to regiment and regulate every facet of our lives.